Honourable Nathan Guy.
Mr Speaker, as Minister responsible for the three departments concerned as part of this bill, that Internal Affairs and the National Library and indeed Archives New Zealand, I'm very pleased to be able to take a call on this very important bill. I've worked hard in this process, I believe, over the last 12 months. These three agencies share very natural synergies. They all have a common focus on using digital technology and making public information more widely accessible to citizens of New Zealand. The principle behind the integration is simple. It will allow expertise and resources to be combined at the same time sharing back office costs. Any savings will be redirected into better frontline services for the public, and the strengths and qualities of these three combined departments will serve the public well, I believe. Since becoming Minister of these three departments, I've spent a lot of time talking and listening to stakeholders. I've had regular meetings with the Archives Council, the Guardian Kaitiaki of the Toombul Library, the Library and Information Advisory Commission. I've also met with Friends of the Toombul Library, the National Library Society, and indeed the PSA, amongst others. Key stakeholders were also given the opportunity to make a comment on the draft bill before it was finalised. I've listened very, very carefully through this process, Mr Speaker, and I'm pleased that the legislation addresses a lot of the concerns that have been raised by these various groups. The government's always made it clear through this process, Mr Speaker, that this is not about changing the major roles or functions of the departments concerned, and the legislation confirms this. In particular, the independence and integrity of the Chief Archivist is safeguarded. This position will be responsible to the Chief Executive of the new integrated department and will be protected from any improper influence in performing his or her independent statutory functions. It's important to maintain the principle of an independent check on government record keeping. There are plenty of examples from around the world where the Chief Archivist works in a variety of different models with the independence preserved. For example, over the Tasman in Australia, Mr Speaker, the Chief Archivist sits within the Prime Minister and Cabinet portfolio. In the United Kingdom, the Chief Archivist sits within the Ministry of Justice. In Ireland, they sit within Arts, Sports and Tourism. And I think it's important for Mrs Chadwick to actually understand the Crown law opinion about this bill, because that's been sought, and I don't think she's probably had the chance to hear about what the Crown law opinion says. So I'll tell her. The opinion confirms that the nature of the services provided by Archives New Zealand and the National Library will remain the same. That's the Crown law opinion. Now, what I want to tell Mrs Chadwick this afternoon is this is what the PSA said. All right, Brenda Pilot, this is what she said, the National Secretary of the PSA. We are happy with the bill because it retains the statutory roles of the National Librarian, the Chief Librarian and the Chief Archivist. Mrs Pilot went on to say they've appreciated being consulted by the Minister Nathan Guy. The matters raised by our members have been picked up in the bill. I'm not sure if Mrs Chadwick was actually aware of what the PSA came out in supporting this bill. I'm sure now that she is indeed aware of that. And I'm sure that Mrs Chadwick is now aware of the Crown law opinion, and that will, I'm sure, give her some reassurance. So I think in conclusion, Mr Speaker, it's important to note that this bill amends the National Library Act of 2003 and the Public Records Act of 2005 to reflect the change in legal status of these agencies, and it represents the next chapter in what is a very exciting future for all three agencies. It builds on other work by the government to modernise and how we store and preserve information and keep up with the latest technology. I'm very proud, as the Minister responsible for Archives New Zealand and the National Library, to have secured in this year's budget $12.6 million of new money over the next 4 years to create a government digital archive. $12.6 million secured in this year's budget of new money for a government digital archive. It shows the commitment, Mr. Speaker, that this government has on ensuring that we preserve and look after vital information for future generations of this country. This government has also invested, Mr. Speaker, $52 million, and you see it happening right now across the road, in the National Library. I was also given the wonderful opportunity to open the new library in Auckland, another $1 million of investment into that area. So this government is making a huge commitment to these iconic institutions that are going to be here for future generations to enjoy. So, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Internal Affairs, I know, is a very strong and professional functioning department. Archives New Zealand and the National Library will soon have access to a greater range of resources and expertise than they've ever had before. I encourage everyone to please try and embrace the opportunities and how everyone can maximise these benefits. I look forward to hearing more during the Select Committee.